All right. Well, welcome to you all again, you that are here and you that are in Never Never Land. There's a couple things that I need to do preliminary before we begin the class. There's 3 books remaining. There were 4, but as you know, we're moving and I'm getting rid of books that I don't need. So those 3 books want a home. I mean, there's some of the resources I picked up knowing that I was going to teach this class. Second thing I want to do preliminary, a question came up last time about Chronicles and Kings. So I did some research on that, and Kings is generally regarded as the oldest of those 2 documents. Remember, initially when they were written as one scroll. And then they've been divided when they were in translation into different books and chapter and verse and so on. So Kings is regarded as not only the oldest, but the most accurate translation. It's hard to know exactly when its final shape was put together, but probably before the captivity in Babylon, but it might have been during that time. So Kings has First and Second Kings just deals with that period in Israel's history from the end of the judges to the early days of the royalty with Saul and David and so on, and going through all the kings of both the northern and the southern kingdom. The writer of Kings has a definite bias towards the southern kingdom. And when you read the little epitaph about each king who dies and what they did, invariably, if it's a king from the northern kingdom, they did evil in the sight of the world. Whereas the kings from Judah, sometimes they did, and sometimes they followed after David and his obedience to God. So the writer of Kings has a very different sort of thrust. Chronicles was probably put together at a much later period. It borrows material from not only Kings, but Chronicles. If you've ever read Chronicles, First Chronicles begins with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and goes through that whole history up to the time of the kings, King David and King Solomon and so on. The writer of Chronicles treats Solomon much more gently than you get in Kings, particularly towards the end of Solomon's reign. He was a bad guy. And that's the way the Kings recorded it. But you don't hear that in Chronicles. And you don't hear anything in Chronicles about all the 700 wives and 300 concubines that Kings says Solomon had. Solomon just says he married other foreign wives, and particularly there were probably political alliances that were made. So that's just a brief little tidbit about the 2 sources of Solomon's life. If you want to do a fascinating kind of read, get First Kings, where it starts with Solomon, and then get Chronicles, where it starts with Solomon. I think it's in chapter 3 of Chronicles, and just read them side by side, and you get a little different nuance of how each writer treated Solomon. And by the way, when you read, because this is leading to next week, we're going to do an entirely different presentation than we're doing this week. It's based on this book, Dismantling Injustice, a Disorderly Parable of the Song of Solomon. And he takes a very political stance against Solomon and kings. maybe kings who want to be kings. But anyway, if he was living in nowadays, he'd have a fun time with Trump. So that's the reading for next week. And while I'm just mentioning it, this week we have 2 readers because it's based on this book, which is by Chana Block and Ariel Block. And they treat it very much like a love story. And so throughout, it's just 2 voices. There's a chorus voice called the Women of Jerusalem and the Brothers, and they'll introduce those sayings, but it's not a lot. It's more like in a Greek theater where you have a chorus has a part to say. So this book, we'll hear it as a love story, which modern translators are prone to read Song of Songs as a love story. If you remember last week, that was not the case. For years until early 20th century, it was read as a story about God and humanity and so on. It was treated very differently. And so one of the things I'd like to, at the end of the class, in next week's, we have 6 readers. So some of you are going to have to get out of your little tush and come up here because we're going to have 6 people up here reading. We have the Solomite girl, the Shulamite, King Solomon, the shepherds, the harem, the eunuchs, and the villagers. And we don't have enough men to go around, so some of you are going to have to take one of those roles and be a guy, but that's okay. So we'll have 6 readers for next week. Now, in reading this, even in English translation, there's a lot of words and images that we don't catch very well. Some of them are words that we don't even know. But early on in the poem, and it goes throughout, there's a Hebrew word called dodim, and it's a word for lovemaking, because that comes up quite often in English. It doesn't say love making, but your love, and it talks about love. And the writer of Hebrews was not squeamish about talking about lovemaking. It's only, other eras and other translations that get a little nervous about that. But that was not the case for the writer of it. So that's one thing I want to lift up. And then the other is the vineyard appears often in the poem. The vineyard was an image for a female eroticism. Now, it also was a vineyard, but that was the way the vineyard gets used throughout the poem. And then often you have phrases about the twin breasts, but it's correlated with twins of a gazelle. A gazelle was an animal, a wild animal, that was beautiful, graceful. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Africa, but to see gazelles, they can leap over 12 feet, and they just gracefully. So the gazelle appears often, and twins was really a symbol of fecundity. So you'll find often twin fawns of the gazelle in the English translation. There's a number of other things that I would like to say, but I'm just going to lift up some. Early on, the Shunammite refers to herself as dark. And earlier, there were translations that said she was African American. But that's not the sense at all. She just was a country girl. She was out in the fields. And so she was bronzed by the sun. And whereas city girls were very fair-skinned and wanted to stay that way, but she was, and so that's kind of the metaphor about the Shunammite. Let me see if there's just another. I can make notes about all kinds of things, but there is a term for Kedar. Kedar was an ancient city earlier than the Jews in Jerusalem. And that reference comes in here. So you just might wonder, where in the world is Kedar? And there's other images of places like the mountains of Lebanon and so on. What I would suggest as you hear this, if you hear a word or a phrase that just doesn't make sense to you, like our friend here, just make a note of it or remember it, and we'll go over it at the end of the time. The question that Judith asked is, why are we reading it here rather than from your Bible? Most Bibles do not distinguish carefully between the male and the female voices. And this translation is very intentional about doing that, because if you don't read the Song of Songs with that kind of nuance, you miss a lot of what is happening in the story. And it's really not a story. It's a series of, if you wish, two young lovers who are just enjoying the life, the love that they are experiencing. And that's what the writer was trying to capture. It's a beautiful song about young love. And, you know, we're all sort of old timers, but think back when you were a teenager and in love and all that went on with that. That's kind of what the poem is trying to capture, is that exuberance of young love. So let's see if there's this strange little story about the foxes. It's with the male watchman's voice. It's an allusion to foreigners, and you know this from reading for world history, foreigners coming in and sweeping away the young brides that they come across. That's what that little phrase has to do. It's a strange insertion. You'd wonder what it is and why it is, but that's what the intention is. There's a lot of imagery about plants and aromatic plants, because remember, this is springtime. And this is when all of the plants are just coming alive and they're exuding their fragrance into the air. And that's what the writer tries to capture, is, and some of the fragrances that you will hear, how many of you are good Catholics? Well, only a couple of you, but you are used to incense, right? Almost always the base of incense is frankincense. And frankincense appears in here because that's an aromatic thing. The same way with myrrh often is used because it's based on the resin of a plant. And it's also used quite often as incense. So I think that is all I need to say till we hear the story. And Judith, by the way, volunteered to read. Our other friend, he didn't volunteer. He was what's the word that Solomon, he was conscripted, because that's one of the words that's used in King of Kings, or in Kings, of how Solomon got his temple and his royal palace. He conscripted labor to do it. He didn't have to go across to Africa to get his labor. He got it right from the people who were there in the country, either people who were foreigners or the regular Israelite people. And they were probably treated as poorly as the African-American slaves because they had a job to do and they were better do it. So, any questions or comments before we begin hearing this? You should be able to. You might find some translations a little bit different, and you might find it hard to know who is speaking, because if your Bible does not distinguish carefully, or you might find some variations. I mean, the issue of translating Hebrew or any other language of that type is you have to make some choices on how you're going to translate it and how you're going to reference the different images that come.
I'll try to, when we get a new chapter, just say the chapter number. I'll insert it into with a dialogue somehow so that at least you can catch the beginning of chapters.
That would be very helpful. And there's, as I said right at the beginning, there's only 8 chapters to the Song of Songs. So it's not a long book, but it will be fun. All right, so I think that's enough for me to say at the beginning. Before we leave, I'll want to give out these 6 scripts to those of you who are of good voice. Now I'm going to sit down so I can listen.
Kiss me, make me drunk with your kisses. Your sweet loving is better than wine. You are fragrant. You are myrrh and aloes. All the young women want you. Take me by the hand and let's run together. My lover, my king, has brought me into his chambers. We will laugh, you and I, and count, and each kiss better than wine. Every one of them wants you. I am dark, daughters of Jerusalem, and I am beautiful. Dark as the tents of Kedar, lavish as Solomon's tapestries. Do not see me only as dark. The sun has stared at me. My brothers were angry with me. They made me guard the vineyards. I have not guarded my own. Tell me, my only love, where do you pasture your sheep? Where will you let them rest in the heat of the noon? Why should I lose my way among the flocks of your Why should I lose my way among the flocks of your companions?
Loveliest of all women, if you lose your way, follow in the tracks of the sheep. Graze your goats in the shade of the shepherd's tents. My love, I dreamed of you as a mare, my very own, among Pharaoh's chariots. Your cheekbones, those looped earrings, the string of beads at your throat. I will make you golden earrings with silver filigree.
My king lay down beside me, and my fragrance wakened the night. All night between my breaths, my love is a cluster of myrrh, a sheaf of henna blossoms in the vineyards of Elan Gede.
And you, my beloved, how beautiful you are. Your eyes are doves.
You are beautiful, my king, and gentle. Wherever we lie, our bed is green. Our roof beams are cedar, our rafters fir. 2. I am the rose of Sharon, the wild lily of the valleys.
Like a lily in the field of thistles, such is my love. Among the young women,
And my beloved among the young men is a branching apricot tree in the wood. In that shade I have often lingered, tasting the fruit. Now he has brought me to the house of wine, and his flag over me is love. Let me lie among vine blossoms in a bed of apricots. I am in a fever of love. His left hand beneath my head, his right arm holding me close. Daughters of Jerusalem, swear to me by the gazelles, by the deer in the field, that we will never awaken love until it is ripe. The voice of my love, listen, bounding over the mountains toward me, across the hills. My love is a gazelle, a wild stag. There he stands on the other side of our wall, gazing between the stones, and he calls to me.
And he calls to me, hurry, my love, my friend, and come away. Look, winter is over. The rains are done. Wildflowers spring up in the fields. Now is the time of the nightingale. In every meadow you hear the song of the turtle dove. The fig tree has sweetened in its green fruit, and the young budded vines smell spicy. Hurry, my love, my friend, come away. My dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the shadow of the cliff, let me see you,
I think
all of you,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
all of you. Let me hear your voice, your delicious song. I love to look at you. Brothers, this is from all the male. Catch us the foxes, the quick little foxes that raid our vineyards now when the vines are in blossom.
My beloved is mine and I am his. He feasts in a field of lilies. Before day breathes, before the shadows of night are gone, run away, my love, be like a gazelle, a wild stag in the jagged mountains. At night, 3. At night in my bed, I longed for my only love. I sought him, but I did not find him. I must rise and go about the city, the narrow streets and squares, till I find my only love. I sought him everywhere, but I could not find him. Then the watchmen found me as they went about the city. Have you seen him? Have you seen the one I love? I had just passed him when I found my only love. I held him. I would not let him go until I brought him to my mother's house, into my mother's room. Daughters of Jerusalem, swear to me by the gazelles, by the deer in the field, that you will never awaken love until it is ripe. Who is that rising from the desert like a pillar of smoke? These are the daughters speaking. Chapter 3. Who is rising from the desert like a pillar of smoke, more fragrant with myrrh and frankincense than all the spices of the merchant? Oh, the splendors of King Solomon, the bravest of Israel surround his bed, 70 warriors, each of them skilled in battle, each with his sword on his thigh against the terror of night. King Solomon built a pavilion from the cedars of Lebanon. Its pillars he made of silver, cushions of gold, couches of purple linen, and the daughters of Jerusalem paved it with love. Come out, O daughters of Jerusalem, and gaze at Solomon the king. See the crown his mother has set on his head on the day of his wedding, the day of his heart's great joy. 4.
Chapter 4. How beautiful you are, my love, my friend. The doves of your eyes look out from the thicket of your hair. Your hair, like a flock of goats, bounding down Mount Gilead. Your teeth, white ewes, all alike, that come upon fresh from the pond. A crimson ribbon, your lips. How I listen to your voice. The curve of your cheek, a pomegranate in the thickest of your hair. Your neck is a tower of David, raised in splendor. 1,000 bucklers hangs upon it, all the shields of the warriors. Your breasts are 2 fawns, twins of gazelle, grazing in the field of lilies. Before day breathes, before the shadow of night are gone, I will hurry to the mountain of myrrh, the hill of frankincense. You are all beautiful, my love, my perfect one. Oh, come with me, my bride. Come down with me from Lebanon. Look down from the peak of Amana. Look down from Sinai and Hermon. From the mountains of the leopards, the lion's dens. You have ravished my heart, my sister, my bride. Ravish me with one glance of your eyes, one link of your necklace. And oh, my sweet loving, my sister, my bride. the wine of your kisses, the spice of your fragrant oils. Your lips are honey and milk, and under your tongue, your clothes hold the scent of Lebanon. And an enclosed garden in my sister, my bride, a hidden well, a sealed spring. Your branches are an orchard, a pomegranate tree, heavy with fruit. Flowering henna and spikenard, is that how you pronounce it? Spikenards and saffron, cane and cinnamon, with every tree of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, all the rare spices. You are a fountain in the garden, a well of living waters that streams from Lebanon.
Awake, north wind. O south wind, come, breathe upon my garden. Let its spices stream out. Let my lover come into his garden and taste its delicious fruit.
I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh and my spices. I have eaten from the honeycomb. I have drunk the milk and the wine. Feast, friends, and drink till you are drunk with love.
5. I was asleep, but my heart stayed awake. Listen, my lover knocking.
Open, my sister, my friend, my dove, my perfect one. My hair is wet, drenched with the dew of night.
But I have taken off my clothes. How can I dress again? I have bathed my feet. Must I dirty them? My love reached in for the latch and my heart beat wild. I rose to open to my love, my fingers wet with myrrh, sweet flowing myrrh on the door bolt. I opened to my love, but he had slipped away. How I wanted him when he spoke. I sought him everywhere, but I could not find him. I called his name, but he did not answer. Then the watchmen found me as they went about the city. They beat me and they bruised me and they tore the shawl from my shoulders. These watchmen of the walls, swear to me, daughters of Jerusalem, if you find him now, you must tell him, I am in the fever of love. The daughters say, how is your lover different from any other, O beautiful woman? Who is your lover that we must swear to you? My beloved is milk and wine. He towers above 10,000. His head is burnished gold, the mane of his hair black as the raven. His eyes like doves by the rivers of milk and plenty. His cheeks a bed of spices, a treasure of precious scents. His lips red lilies wet with myrrh. His arms a golden scepter with gems of topaz, his loins the ivory of thrones, inlaid with sapphire, his thighs like marble pillars on pedestals of gold, tall as Mount Lebanon, a man like a cedar. His mouth is sweet wine, he is all delight. He is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. The daughters say, number 6, chapter 6, where has your lover gone, O beautiful one? Say where he is, and we will seek him with you. And they answered, my love has gone down to his garden, to the beds of spices to graze and to gather lilies. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He feasts in a field of lilies.
You are beautiful,
6.
my love, as Tirzah, majestic as Jerusalem, daunting as the stars in their courses. Your eyes, turn them away, for they dazzle me. Your hair is like a flock of goats, bounding down Mount Gilead. Your teeth, white ewes, all alike, that came up fresh from the pond. The curve of your cheek, a pomegranate in your thicket of hair. 70 are the queens, 80 the king's women, and maidens without number. One alone is my love. One alone is my love, my perfect, my only one. Love of her mother, light of her mother's eyes. Every maiden calls her happy. Queens praise her, and all the king's women.
And the daughters say, who is that rising like the morning star, clear as the moon, bright as the blazing sun, daunting as the stars in their courses?
Then I went down to the walnut grove to see the new green by the brook, to see if the vine has budded if the pomegranate trees were in flower. And oh, before I was aware, she set me in the most lavish of chariots.
And the daughters say, 7, again, O Shulamite, dance again that we may watch you dancing. Why do you gaze at the Shulamite as she whirls down the rows of dancers?
How graceful your steps in those sandals, O nobleman's daughter. The gold of your thigh, shaped by a master craftsman. Your navel is the moon's bright drinking cup. May it brim with wine. Your belly is a mound of wheat edged by lilies, with lilies. Your breasts are 2 fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is a tower of ivory. Your eyes are pools in Heshbon and the gates of the city of lords. Your proud nose of the tower of Lebanon that looked towards Damascus. Your head crowns, you are like Mount Carmel. The hair of your head like royal purple. A king is caught in a thicket. How wonderful you are, O love. How much sweeter than all other pleasures. That day you seemed to me a tall palm tree, and your breast the cluster of its fruit. I said in my heart, let me climb into this palm tree and take hold of its branches. And oh, may your breasts be like clusters of grapes on a vine, the scent of your breath like apricots, your mouth good wine.
That pleases my lover, rousing him even from sleep. I am my lover's, and he longs for me, only for me. Come, my beloved, let us go out into the fields and lie all night among the flowering henna. Let us go early to the vineyards to see if the vine has budded, if the blossoms have opened, and the pomegranate is in flower. There will I give you my love. The air is filled with the scent of mandrakes, and at our doors, rare fruit of every kind, my love, I have stored away for you. 8. If only you were a brother who nursed at my mother's breast, I would kiss you in the streets and no one would scorn me. I would bring you to the house of my mother and she would teach me. I would give you spiced wine to drink, my pomegranate wine. His left hand beneath my head, his right arm holding me close. Daughters of Jerusalem, swear to me that you will never awaken love until it is ripe. The daughters say, who is that rising from the desert, her head on her lover's shoulder? There beneath the apricot tree, your mother conceived you. There you were born, in that very place I awakened you. Bind me as a seal upon your heart, a seal upon your arm, for love is as fierce as death, its jealousy bitter as the grave. Even its sparks are a raging fire, a devouring flame. Great seas cannot extinguish love. No river can sweep it away. If a man tried to buy love with all the wealth in his house, he would be despised.
I have a little sister, and she has no breast. What shall we do for our sister, when suitors beseech her? If she is a wall, we will build a silver turret upon her. If she is a door, we will bolt her with beams of cedar wood.
I am a wall, and my breasts are towers, but for my lover, I am a city of peace.
King Solomon had a vineyard on a hill of plenty. He gave that vineyard to watchmen, and each would earn for its fruit 1,000 pieces of silver. My vineyard is all my own. Keep your 1,000, Solomon, and pay 200 to those who must cut the fruit. O women of the garden, all of our friends listen for your voice. Let me hear it now.
Hurry, my love, run away like my gazelle, my wild stag on the hills of cinnamon. That's it.
That's the end of the reading, and it is so delightful to me to just hear it read. Because I've been reading this the last few days over and over, and it's meant to be heard. because most people in Hebrews would not read it. They didn't have a scroll to read it from. And the only way they would hear the Song of Songs or any other scripture would be to hear it read. Hence why this Song of Songs is read in its entirety at the Passover feast, which is a springtime feast, because it's full of illusions about springtime. So let me get up to the front again. But I'm wondering if any of you picked up any words or phrases or images that you would like to sort of get clarified.
Just a comment, I don't know if I would feel a compliment if someone said my hair was like a flock of goats.
Well, you have to image that a flock of goats in that time was an image of nature, because goats are domesticated, but they roamed in the fields. And if you were lucky enough to have a whole flock of goats roaming around in the fields, maybe it would work. Thank you.
I think this almost lends itself to parody. I can imagine somebody submitting to the HASP Review a 20th century version of this in the vernacular.
Well, and hence why the allegorical method was so easily slipped into, because these images, these metaphors, are not ones that we're accustomed to. But in the time they were written, they probably would be more accustomed to. Jane has a word.
Yes, they're often talking about apples, but in the reading that you did, it was
Apricots.
apricots.
Yes, apples were only introduced into the Middle East in the middle of, the probably after they were nurtured, when they were introduced into this country, probably around the same time they were introduced into the Middle East. But apricots were common. They grew wild.
Apples come from.
Asked, where do the apples come from?
I don't know. I mean,
They
we
came from the Garden
have-
of Eden, right?
We have wild apples in our own country, and so I'm sure some enterprising person, but they weren't introduced here in this country. They were from Europe, but I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, well, that's just one of the myths we go by, but there really was a Johnny Appleseed, and he did go around through the countryside and plant his apples.
So how would you interpret chapter 8, verses 1 and 2?
What does it say?
It says, "Oh, that you were like my brother who nursed at my mother's breast. If I should find you outside, I would kiss you, and I would not be despised. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother."
I think as I hear that, this is very much of a feminine story. And it's one allusion to, well, there's more than just women in the story. So, and it talks about the bonding, because we tend to think, if you're a brother, you're not bonded to your sister. But in another world, another time, maybe that could be. And the image of the brother on one breast and the Shulamite on the other breast, what an image of sharing, of connectedness, that we tend to, in our gender orientation, not make those correlations. Well, it does to us, because we're so gender oriented. Although, but if I just might make a side about gender, I heard on the radio, what's the term for genderlessness? No, there's another word. What was it? Non-binary. And I had never heard that before, but it's a pretty common term nowadays for some people who don't want to be identified as either male or female. And so, I mean, the young people know that stuff quite easily, not us.
I can talk louder than, can I? Oh, okay. It sounds, to me, most of Song of Solomon is about a woman and her lover.
Yes.
So I just had a little bit of problem with all of a sudden it says, oh, that you were like my brother, unless it means that back in the old days that she and her brother shared the breasts of their mother.
Well, that's a pretty powerful symbol.
But then he said, he says, if I should find you outside, I would kiss you and I would not be despised. So it sounds kind of, maybe
Well,
I'm living in today's world.
There is a tone in this. It's not graphic, but there's a tone that there's something illicit about this love story.
Right, because
And
it
you
has that word,
particularly
and not
hear
be
that when you hear
despised.
the
Yeah.
watchmen, because they're the ones that are trying to keep things proper and right.
I only found it in that chapter 8, just that
Right,
one part.
right,
So
Yeah.
Maybe
think-
it's just that she's accepting him as part of her family. As she would love her brother, she loves him as family.
Mhm.
The kinship bond. It's not only an erotic love, but it's a love of kinship. And I think they can be blessed that way, I think, rather than seen as something incestuous.
When I was reading this, all of a sudden it occurred to me that, are we talking about two men?
Not with all those breasts.
No, I think that might be something that some contemporary people might want to read into it, because there's other stories in the Old Testament that people have interpreted as being sort of gay love. For example, the story of David and Jonathan. Now, that was a very strong bond between two men. Well, my gay friends, they say, well, they're gay. Well, I don't think that was part of the intention of the writer of Kings to talk about Jonathan and David. They were just bonded friends. So with our modern ears, we sometimes hear stuff that are not necessarily there in the original. Oh, we have plenty of time.
it says, oh, that you were like my brother.
Mhm.
Well, so then I wish you were like my brother. My brother nursed at my mother's breasts, and then I would find you outside and I would kiss you, and it would not be despised. So maybe like is the word that I missed in the translation. I mean, I'm not
Yeah,
trying
and
to be, I'm not trying to be judgmental here.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking all of a sudden I'm listening to this and I'm in it. It's, to me, it's a wonderful story.
Mhm.
I hope nobody listening to me, but I would have been great to have my husband talk to me like that. And I mean, that's pretty awesome.
When you were young and courting your
Yeah.
husband, yeah,
I mean, the word.
you could talk about your twin breasts and
Well, another topic. But anyway, so maybe the word like is,
right.
that you were, like I could say to somebody, I really like you. You remind me of my brother.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's more of a relational element. And the nuance there, you just get it fleetingly in the story, but there's something about this love relationship that has to be kept under wraps. You can't openly, fragrantly expose it. So some of the commentators, by the way, not the ones that I've read, but some want to suggest that they never consummated their love. It's just a courtship. Well, when you read it, it's pretty much a sexual consummation. Jane.
In my, I have a book with translations. The annotated part here said a spiritual desire.
Well, that's kind of the allegorical dig, because we don't quite know. I mean, the writers of allegorical writings didn't want to deal with the raw sexuality of desire. And so they allegorized it because that's how they were comfortable with it. So, yeah, right.
Actually, the reference to brother makes sense. If you think about a king or a man having a number of wives, and if you were royalty, you were expected then to marry within the family.
Mhm.
So it would be a half brother but that's the men that you would be looking at are really brothers.
Yeah, probably, and that could work. The Shulamite was not from royalty, though. She was just a country. I mean, she was a country girl and probably came from country parents. And hence why there's so many imagery of nature, because she was out roaming around in nature and was comfortable in dealing with that imagery. By the way, if you're at all interested in creation spirituality, you might suggest that your group, your church, could read this psalm or this poem from the point of view of nature, and how nature can be such a wonderful thing, particularly in the springtime. Anyway.
You asked us to pick a favorite verse from Song of Solomon.
Yes.
Can I change it to my favorite? I mean, can we go into that, or do you have something
Oh,
else?
no, go ahead.
Okay.
No, I don't have anything more till next week.
Okay. Well, before we even got into the Song of Solomon, I always loved the chapter 2, the 12th verse. And I picked the King James Version just because, as so many people do, they love the poetry, the images that come across on King James. So 2:12. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of the singing of birds is come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land. I think that is just so beautiful. But in my later translation, which is the Common English Bible, it says the song of the turtle dove instead of turtle. So that's interesting that they have different translations for that word. Voice of the turtle or the voice of the turtle dove.
The turtle dove was a migratory bird, somewhat like our mourning doves, except now they tend to hang around all winter. But originally they were migratory, and the turtle dove was particularly migratory, and they have a penchant to sing all day long, just like a mockingbird, up on the top of a tree, sings all day long. So the song of the turtle dove was a vivid memory about springtime.
King James keeps it just turtle.
I think it's just the shortened form of it
Yeah,
instead of turtle dove. Maybe
yeah, I don't
fit
know
the rhyme
why
better, or
they-
the scansion of the verse or something. But I
turtle-
mean, turtles don't have voices.
turtles are not known for talking very much.
Okay, you have just doves. Okay, well, that would make more sense if you had to shorten it, just make it doves instead of turtle.
By the way, that particular text that you said, 8, 11 through 13 is the alternate reading in the Revised Common Lectionary on 2 different occasions. It's the only text that's an alternate reading in the Revised Common Lectionary. They don't want to deal with breast and all that other stuff, but they did pick this.
This was cleaned up a little bit. But I noticed 2 different references to teeth and the teeth likened to something really weird. Yeah, they're all the same size. And I'm wondering why twice in here? I mean, this is a short book to begin with, but why do we get the repetition? It's like you ran out of fresh things to say. I don't know
Well,
why
you
that
know,
was.
us old timers who've had our teeth for a long time, they're pretty dark and colored. But if you look at a youngster, their teeth are bright and gleaming, especially if they brush their teeth every day. So I think that was kind of the imagery of the youthfulness of the lovers, and the teeth are, you know, if you're going to describe a woman in all of her features,
Mhm.
teeth would be part of it.
Mhm. Okay. You know, another good parody would be to describe people in their 70s and 80s as love objects. Yeah, I'm thinking of all kinds of interesting challenges to build on this.
When I was reading about the teeth, I thought about, I was lucky that I never produced wisdom teeth, and I don't have a very big mouth, so that was good. But people who have too many teeth, you know, they're not as attractive as somebody who has got nice, even, straight teeth. And there certainly didn't have braces in those days. So I just thought it was I pictured in my mind a perfect smile.
Since when have you seen a movie star without white, perfect teeth?
David,
Yes.
I took a lot of art classes because I had an art minor. And some of the paintings during the Renaissance were of the garden enclosed with the Virgin.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that this is where they got that image. Chapter 4:12, a garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. So that enclosed garden, there's the picture of the Virgin in the garden, and then there's this low wall around her as sort of a protection. Plus, it also can mean her virginity is still intact because the wall has not been
Breached.
breached.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm sure that is part of the imagery of the walled-in garden. And if you think of Robert Frost, walls are meant to keep people out and keep some people in. Yes.
I think that if there's a bonding of the real world and the sexual world into reality,
Mhm.
the image of mother nursing her children for the breasts, not just a sexual object, and comparing all of her glorious things with things of nature,
Mhm.
the natural part of things.
Yeah, right.
That I love nature, and you just reflect it.
I think that us moderners who are not as comfortable with hearing raw sexuality in this way, we tend to get stuck in it. Because maybe the writer was trying to paint a picture that just included not sex, but the whole thing about new life coming. And that's why there's so many images about nature in here, because it's not just human sexuality that's blooming and budding in springtime. It's all of creation. It's the whole natural world. So let me just mention a couple other images that you might have heard. Wally stumbled on the word spikenard. It's not a word that we know very often, but it was a costly perfume from the Himalayas. So there's images in this song that are not just objects or things from the Middle East. And of course, there were trade routes that were active in those days. So spikenard is one of those perfumes that came from.
Isn't there a story in the New Testament about Jesus and nard? N-A-R-D?
Right.
I wonder
That
if
was
that
the woman who poured the nard over his head.
so I wonder if there's a connection there.
Yeah, and I
Between,
don't, nard and spikenard.
yeah,
That'd be a good question, and I don't know that, but I think that's reasonable.
I checked that word on when I actually was reading this earlier. And in the dictionary, they said they're interchangeable.
Nard and
Not or
spikenard.
spikenard.
I think you were onto something, yeah. Because it was referred to as a costly perfume in the New Testament, and so yeah. So one other thing I want to refer to, pomegranate, that appears quite often in the song. I don't know how many of you actually go and buy pomegranates, but it's very much of a sexual symbolism, because it has this outer shell and you open it up and there's all these beautiful seeds inside. And so often I have heard pomegranate as a love apple. And so, that appears quite often in here, because pomegranates are a tropical fruit. So they're much more common in a tropical area than, you don't go and find a pomegranate tree in Michigan. Wait a minute, you're getting a mic because we're not.
I can't think of the word. When in my Bible, it had said apple in the
Yeah.
term. I wonder if it could have been pomegranate.
Well, they refer to pomegranates separately from apricots. And I think with the imagery of apricots, and I guess you could similarly think of an apricot as kind of a image of love, because you open up and there's a seed inside and the two halves of it are just wonderful. But it was a common fruit. I think I haven't quite been able to track this down, but I think it grew in wild groves, apricots. We're not used to that in our country, but I think that was true in the Middle Eastern times.
it also comes from mythology. Right now, I can't tell the myth, but there's a pomegranate that comes up.
Oh,
in-
the pomegranates?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
I did look up the origins of apples, and it goes back to Kazakhstan. 1500 BC
Oh, really?
was when it came into Europe.
Wow.
So apples. So we might just be going back to the translation of the Hebrew word, what choice there was, but the apples have been around longer than we thought.
Yeah, they could have crept into the Middle East earlier on.
They said Greece and Rome had them.
Uh-huh, yeah. Wow,
And the
interesting.
Garden of Eden story, it's just the fruit of the tree, right? It's not anything
Right.
specific.
I always thought the fruit in the Garden of Eden story was a mango, because there's such a common tropical fruit.
of the subject of, of the fruit, I started reading a book called The Island of the Lost Trees. And part of the book is written from the point of view of the fig tree, which insists that it was not an apple in the garden of Eden, it was a fig.
And there's a couple of references in this song about the fig tree, particularly the blooming of the fig tree. Fig trees were common, still are common in the Middle East. And if you travel in the South, like Georgia and South, fig trees are quite common. And that's also kind of a sexual imagery, if you wish. But fig trees, different than most trees that produce a one cycle of fruit, they keep producing fruit. Once they start bearing, in springtime, they keep producing new fruit all the time. So there's a few references to figs. In the New Testament, you hear fig stories too. Jesus didn't like them, or at least he didn't like the one tree.
And then the fig leaf, the fig
Oh,
leaf is
yeah,
a
right.
symbol that when the male genitalia needs to be covered in art, you get a fig leaf to cover for oftentimes. It's somehow it resembles in some ways the male genitalia.
From online, Linda would like to remind us that the Dutch word for potato is, and now this is a Dutch word I can't pronounce, aardappel, which means earth apple.
Yeah,
So-
that comes from the French, because the French word for potato is pomme de terre, apple
Apple of the earth.
ground. So I'm sure that's where the Dutch word probably came from.
Oh, and maybe the
probably,
poem
but-
for pomegranate too, maybe that poem, P-O-M, yeah.
All right, anything more that we need to say about this poem?
Other cultures that have, I'm just wondering, it's considered by some, I guess, that the Northern Kingdom was more apt to dwell in idolatry, and the Southern Kingdom, the kingdom where Jerusalem was and the kingdom where David and Solomon were more pure and holy. And I'm just wondering is this written as a counteraction or a counterpoint to more idolatrous, or I don't know, the Northern Kingdom maybe had a similar kind of literature about fertility and such, having to do with Baal, worship of Baal or whatever what it was. Could this have been a kind of a sanitized counterpoint to something else in another country or another region maybe it produced? Just speculation. Any thoughts
Yeah,
on
I
that?
don't have a thought about that. What I do know, you're referring to the image of the Northern Kingdom being idolatry seeking.
They worshipped in high places, various
Right.
temples,
I mean, you read the story about Solomon in Kings, and he had many wives, and the storyline goes, they led him astray. They led him to worship other gods. Because the reality was, Judaism was a very patriarchal religion with a patriarchal God, but it was surrounded by matriarchal feminine gods who were much closer, if you wish, connected to the land and to the fertility of the land. So there's that struggle going on in the Old Testament, especially in relationship to the kings of the Northern Kingdom. And because the writer of Kings was very favored of Jerusalem as being the center of where God is, because you get that whole imagery of Solomon building the temple, that that was the place where God was and not in Samaria. Oh, and I just thought of something that we have not said. The Queen of Sheba. There's that story, not in this, but in the story of Solomon. And you find it both in Chronicles and in Kings. The Queen of Sheba hears about Solomon and all that he does and all of his wisdom. And so she comes for a state visit from, well, it's assumed she came from Ethiopia. So here's an interesting nuance about that. In the Orthodox Church of Ethiopia, their churches are built, by the way, out of stone. So they're sunk down, and they carved out the church in the stone. But every Ethiopian Orthodox church has a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. And the storyline that they go by is that the Queen of Sheba, all it says in Kings is that Solomon gave her whatever she wanted. Well, I don't think she wanted the Ark of the Covenant, but supposedly she stole it and took it back with her. And then therefore there's a replica of the Ark of the Covenant in every Orthodox church in Ethiopia. That's just a little aside.
Don't the Ethiopians say that they do have the ark
Yeah,
and that it is in a secret place?
right. They have the original Ark. That's what the storyline is. And all of the other churches have a replica of it, but not the original. Yes, and it was taken by Queen of Sheba when she made her state visit.
That would have been really sacrilegious. Only priests, the
It was
very
just
uppermost of the priests, if we were
just
all
the
men,
high
could even
priest.
go into the Holy of Holies to be anywhere near it. And then for her to do that, it's almost like the desecration of Troy's sacred places during the Trojan War. And it would be, it would think definitely make the Queen of Sheba a persona non grata.
Well, clearly there's no reference to that in the Book of Kings. So that's just kind of an aside. Well, I don't think I want to make any other comments that we haven't covered. There's place names, like you have those 3 mountains of Lebanon, Amana, and I can't remember the other 2, but they're part of, and Lebanon fits into this story because, it fits in more in Solomon's story, because when Solomon built the temple, he went to Lebanon to get from the cedars of Lebanon the structures for the temple and so on. But Lebanon does appear in this story not as frequently as in the Kings. Anything else?
We need to get people to sign up for their parts
Yes,
next
I
week.
have 6 scripts here. So I'll read off what they all are, and then you can decide which one you want to take. And we'll do similar, getting 6 people up here, and we'll have the 2 mics. Some of the parts are more often spoken, like the Shulamite and the shepherd, but there's others that are smaller parts. So first, the Shulamite. Who wants to be the Shulamite? It's a woman. It's all about the Shulamite woman. Okay. Yeah. Go under the sun lamp. All right. The next one is King Solomon. Now, you notice in the version that we heard, King Solomon doesn't have any spoken parts, but in this version, he does, because it's all about how bad he is. Okay. Then the next one is the shepherd. We heard the shepherd today. Who wants to be the shepherd? And then we have the harem, and the harem appears in this version quite frequently, because the harem is Solomon's harem. It's not 100 or 1,000-fold, but it's a harem. So who wants to be the harem? Who wants to be the bad girl? All right, and then we have the eunuchs. And a lot of these eunuchs in the harem take the place that we heard of the daughters of Jerusalem and the brothers. And then finally, the villagers who just appear at the very, very end of the story. So in preparing for this, again, I would urge you to go particularly to the King's version of Solomon. And towards the end, after he has done all this building stuff, but even early on, it talks about him conscripting labor. And in one part of it, he's conscripting people who are Jewish. In another part, they're conscripting people who are visitors, or what do we call them in our modern day? Aliens, yes. So anyway, you read that part of it. The reality is the King's version pictures Solomon up until the very end as this benevolent, godly kind of a king, and doesn't go into detail other than hints of it about how he was able to do what he did because of the free labor that he conscripted to do his work. And that's, if you know world history, that's what kings do. So this story we're going to get is as a whole different version of the Song of Songs than what we're used to. Yes.
It's like we used to say how beautiful our capital is, and then you find out that, well, we should really thank the slaves because it was built by slave labor.
Right.
So there's usually a secondary story to a lot of these things that we just take for granted.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, remember, history is written by male victors. Remember those 3 books up there, if anybody wants to take home? The big one is considered by a lot of people as one of the commentaries on Song of Songs. It's as detailed as you may want to get. But anyway, I'm not taking them home because we're getting rid of stuff.
Find it in the Hasp Library.
Well, that'd be a good place for it. Just as an aside about books, I have all my, you know, for being a minister for 40 some years, I have a lot of theology books. And there is a place in Grand Rapids on Patterson called Theological Book Center. I took 20 boxes of books to that place because they sort them and then distribute them to third world countries, to Bible colleges, seminaries, sometimes even religion departments of regular universities. So I was glad to find a home for all of those books. My lifetime of what is it, bibliophile? Yes, back there.
I just want to mention and give thanks to the woman who introduced me to HASP. Lori Bensky. And she left Holland and went to work in Orlando with translating Bibles
Oh,
into languages. And most of them are to Africa or what, you know, countries that don't have the Bible as their base.
Right.
And so that's what she's given her life to now.
Uh-huh.
And I thank her for introducing me to all of you at HAST.
Oh, thank you. All right, friends. See you next week.